Gary. Thanks for joining me today. I'm really interested in learning more about the three words that everyone wants more information about: location, 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 right? That's what they say. It's all about location, particularly now as consumers have very different patterns of behavior since COVID. So I'm really interested to hear your perspective on all of that and more. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks for having me, Karen. Excited to chat.
So Foursquare is a leading force in collecting and using location data to help businesses anticipate trends, fulfill service obligations, and get general insights about what consumers are doing and where they're doing it. What's the most interesting observation that you have had over the last 2 years about how consumers' movements have changed, obviously, as a result of COVID?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And certainly the last 2 years have been maybe some of the most fascinating time periods to be operating a company that can have its pulse on human movement, as we've seen waves of less human movement, and then this kind of curve that we seem to be on, which is a return to some level of normalcy with different curves along the way. And one of the things that has stood out from a trend perspective over that 2 years is, if we rewind all the way to the beginning of sort of the pandemic and the lockdowns, there was a kind of thesis around, particularly our company, we were very focused on, that we would see a kind of structural decline in human movement. And what we've actually seen is two forces coming together, which are really interesting at the same time. Corporations during that time period have invested a tremendous amount in digitizing all of their infrastructure.
Yep.
And then there's a massive need now to understand the consumer from both the physical and digital world context, and how those worlds are colliding. And what we've seen is not entirely shocking, and things that we think will stay forever. So things like the ability to order goods and services ahead of your arrival, right?
Yeah.
To limit your time from a dwell perspective, right? We've seen that in retail, we've seen that in QSR, we've seen that in some instances in financial services and banking, the ability to sort of have your service time reduced greatly by the knowledge of your brand, understanding that you're on site during a period of time and knowing what services you have. The second trend that was really interesting is the first wave of the pandemic. There was a high dispersion of folks leaving various cities and so forth, and a prediction, of course, that was going to be our new future. And what we've seen actually is more migration back to kind of our normal places. And it has moved where our foot traffic sort of on the full spectrum of where you go as an individual. But basically, we're getting back to some level of normal. It's localized a lot, right? Folks are not going to the office 5 days a week, but the consumption patterns are remaining within sort of that network between your office and home. Still, just a distribution of when you do that is slightly different, obviously, over the last 2 years.
But those are important data points in order for whether you're a city planner, a real estate developer, a restaurant, a retail establishment, to understand, because how consumers move in and out of the workplace really does drive their business and drives how they manage and staff their own businesses as a result of what consumers are doing at the workplace.
For sure. What's been really interesting as we've worked with companies, as you mentioned, real estate companies, certainly retail companies and so forth, is the first wave kind of post-pandemic is, tell me where my customers went, right? How do I understand what's changed fundamentally? Now what we're seeing is an optimization around what are becoming some normalized patterns. So I'll give you an example. In QSR, what's really interesting, if you think about any location, you now have a combination of your traditional foot traffic plus your order ahead feature, which has grown tremendously during the pandemic, plus the rise of DoorDash, Uber Eats, and so forth. So when we talk to companies that have large footprints, what they're looking to do is not think about just where do I locate my next store or what do I close, but rather how do I optimize the store footprint that I have, because some of those stores may be higher indexed to an Uber Eats order flow than perhaps a walk-in foot traffic. And so how do you optimize actually the physical location to better serve the customer base, knowing what this new pattern is from a order flow perspective? And so it's been really interesting to watch that. The other thing that you're touching on that's been really interesting is, there was a lot of nervousness, of course, in a company like ours in the beginning of the pandemic with the shutdown of human movement. What we've seen is a tremendous growth in the understanding of the value of location data as part of the core, both tech and data architecture of an organization. And we've seen that as you think about the rise of smart supply chain and logistics, which has been obviously a super interesting topic over the last year. But also mobility growing quite a lot, retail shifting the way that retail behaves over the last 2 years, and location's been pretty central to companies really understanding that customer interaction in a new way.
How predictive is your data?
It depends on the use cases. It can be highly predictive based on the scale of our data assets. We operate a business with 95 million global POI venues, 500 million plus devices. And so we have a very strong correlation to certain understanding of patterns over time and the ability to predict how those patterns are going to unfold for companies as they go forward. And it just depends on exactly what companies are looking for. When we look at things like demographic shifts that help shape where companies will either optimize their real estate or place their sort of next door, we have a highly predictive model to help them really understand what is their core demographic and how has that demographic shifted over the last 2 years, because that's been a pretty dynamic, obviously, set of changes that have happened. And so the ability for organizations to use that data to really understand where their customers are and how to best serve them has been highly valued over the last couple of years in particular.
How representative of the broad population is your data set?
It's very representative of the full data set, given the size and scale of the assets. As I talked about, we have such a large grouping of data, and we spend a lot of time thinking about correlation. A lot of our customers value the fact that we're able to give them kind of a broad sense of demographics across their customer base and aren't highly indexed to one age group or one gender or otherwise, which makes the power of what we're able to do with an organization quite robust.
And in terms of how companies obviously use the data to inform their decision making, when you think about some of the sectors where you've seen the shifts so significant, you think about retail in urban locations, but yet the migration to the suburbs and the shift in how consumers are shopping and how in fact they're engaging with brands, but also just consumers in general not going to the store and ordering more online. So the shift in the location expertise is really for the delivery side of a business as opposed to the consumer that's moving about. I mean, when you think about the data sets from that perspective, who's moving and why, I'm sure you get some interesting insights there as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we look at everything from the sort of shifting demographics in local DMAs to understand, in a city, how are core customer cohorts moving? Are more moving to the suburbs or more staying in urban environments? How have the foot traffic patterns, particularly throughout these kind of, close and reopen cycles that we've been in, impacted the ability for companies to operate those that have physical locations, but also then to optimize, everything from that e-commerce curve. Where do you deliver? Where do you set up supply chain and logistics to serve that customer base? How do you have better real-time delivery and so forth has been a big part of what we've been helping organizations from retail to mobility to financial services and so on down the line really optimize, in the dynamic. And that's what's been really interesting here from my perspective is, location data was always valued by a lot of organizations, but the focus has shifted to a very central part of how companies think about building their technology and data assets today.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been thinking about and will write more about is how digital and what we've experienced over the last couple of years really makes proximity no longer a barrier. So if you just use the example of Instacart, where you have the ability to shop at a grocery store that you would never perhaps shop if you had to physically drive, but you can because someone else is doing the driving and the shopping. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on, some of the broader trends about proximity and location that you've observed over the last couple of years because of that phenomenon.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. We've seen kind of two fundamental pillars that I think are driving a lot of the investment that we see by organizations. One is digitization, period, full stop. The companies from every kind of sector that we see, as they've invested in digital infrastructure over the last several years, locations become very core to that. So you think about, banking has become a entirely mobile, interaction with consumers. And so you think about how do you improve things like fraud detection and so forth. We've all had that experience where we do a drive over the last couple of years, get back to, longer road trips. You swipe your credit card at a gas station and you get the, sort of fraud alert. Are you really where you are? Our location technology can really help by tethering that credit card to a mobile device and knowing that it's you, Karen, driving and so forth. And so we've seen numerous examples of that, where by making such large investments in the digital infrastructure, by then needing to understand the physical and digital interaction of a consumer, there's been more and more value ascribed to that ability to have location as core to that architecture. And then if you think about the second trend you touched on, which is the Instacarts, the DoorDashes, the Uber Eats and so forth of the world, any company that's built entirely on effectively on top of a map requires the type of real-time information and telemetry that we can provide in partnership with companies like Apple Maps and Mapbox and so forth that we work with to create that user experience that gets, that store good that you've, wanted to your doorstep in a timely fashion and so forth. And so it's the rise of both of those have really put location to, the center of kind of the investments that we're seeing companies make. Much the same as you see it from like a payment architecture perspective or perhaps communication. And it's a big part of our thesis going forward. Locations become, I always say it this way, the last 10 to 15 years have been about kind of digging the ditches, making the capability robust and global enough so that you could actually build core user experiences in the way that we anticipate companies will continue to do.
So tell me a little bit more about how location intersects with what financial services companies and payment companies in particular are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on this just a little bit before, but as you look at financial services broadly, there's a tremendous amount of investment on every level, from payments through to the consumer experience, which is all becoming a digital, sort of mechanism. And so as you think about how do you make payment architecture more, more intelligent, more secure, and so forth, location can become a core component of that. And the example I gave before, the ability to tether a credit card to a phone is a high correlation, right? That it is indeed, you as opposed to someone else who has stolen your card. But you can also think about experiences in the restaurant space now. When we think about contactless, we talk to a lot of retailers, right, about contactless payments and how can you do that with a location layer that gives the same degree of fidelity, preventative fraud and privacy all in the same time, putting that together so that you can walk into your local retailer your Starbucks, if you will, and purchase a cup of coffee with your payment device and have it secure, known to be yours, and you can actually improve the entire experience, not just the payment layer of it. And so when we're talking to companies in the financial services space broadly, we spend a lot of time thinking about how you can build those services together.
Foursquare has come a long way since its early days of check-in. I never did the check part, I have to tell you. I never really wanted people to know where I was.
Yeah. No,
but
it's really
a lot of people did.
No, a lot of people did, and that's what's very unique about our platform is in effect we've been able to crowdsource a set of very unique data over time and do it in a way that protects the privacy of the consumer. I always say, privacy is a very interesting topic for everyone, but certainly for us, because as I think about it, there's probably nothing more fundamental than who you are and where you are.
Yeah.
And so we've had a legacy of really thinking through that from the beginning. And a lot of consumers have trusted us with that data over time, and it's been it's a big part of what we see as the differentiation that we can create for ourselves in the first instance over the first phase of our company, but now on behalf of the enterprises that use our technology, while still investing a tremendous amount in maintaining that kind of privacy regime as we think about it.
Right, because you need to have the customers agreeing to provide their location in order
Correct.
for your platform to have viability. And we saw what happened with the Apple tags, right? People are concerned because they don't want other people to know where they are. So it is becoming more of a topic of conversation.
Yeah, our philosophy has always been, I give Dennis in particular a lot of credit, going back to the founding of the company. He had a very wise insight, which is this is a bit of a superpower in a lot of ways, and that you have to hold with a lot of responsibility. And so we've always, everyone's familiar with the opt-in mechanism for location data on your mobile device. You're not able to use our technology without that opt-in. So what you won't find is our technology powering things like a flashlight app, which really doesn't have a core user case to know where you are. And we're very focused on what is the user experience, and the user should then opt into that to say, yes, this is actually powering something fundamental of value for me, and so I'm willing to share my location information as a result of that. And that's always been part of how we operate. We wish the entire community of location technology providers would operate the same way. We've certainly talked a lot about the need for regulatory requirements around that, but we'll continue to operate that way with a clear opt-in for consumers, so they truly understand what they're doing, not hidden in some 14-page terms and conditions that are very hard to understand. We think that that's just very fundamental to being able to continue to operate the way we do, providing value to the consumer and letting them choose to operate with whatever data they're willing to share.
How did you go from investor in Foursquare to the CEO?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and one I would say, Karen, I was asked the question inside the company last year, and I said, don't follow my career path because it wasn't as planned as perhaps it seems. Look, I started my life as an operator before I moved into finance and investing. And ultimately, when our CEO at the time stepped down and was ready to take on his new challenge, he essentially launched a new company. We had a lot of discussion at the board level, and I had been pretty involved with the resetting the direction of the company over the last few years as an investor, very active in the budgeting process and so forth. And so raised my hand to ultimately want to go across, and the board was just crazy enough to think that I might be able to run the company. And so it's been an interesting and fun transition. It's also, I think, in many ways been very helpful for the company because with me being around the company first as an advisor and then being on the board for 2 years, as I started last January, we were able to really accelerate kind of where we were going quickly without that high learning curve of kind of the direction of the business.
Yeah. What's 2022 look like? What are you going to be investing more in? What do you think the strategic priorities should be?
Yeah, it's a fun time to answer this question because we're fresh off of kind of strategic planning for ourselves. I would say We're in what has been a multi-year sort of evolution of the business. The first phase was really consolidating a number of assets together to build a broad set of capabilities. Our thesis is to be a full location-based platform. So we have to have the breadth of product capabilities to be able to serve customers in numerous sort of use cases. And we're now at that stage where we can really accelerate that growth. So we're investing a tremendous amount in our core platform and the ability to serve location data in multiple environments, whether you're in AWS, whether you're in Snowflake or otherwise. Mm-hmm. We're investing a lot in globalizing the business. So we operate our global POI database and our data assets in 190 countries globally today, but we have relatively small operations from an international perspective. So we'll be investing quite a lot in growing the business internationally. And then the last part is we just continue to invest a lot. Our thesis at the end of the day is that over the last 10 to 15 years, location services has been broadly about sending customers large amounts of data, right, to be able to build services. We think we've hit kind of a maximum point at which the other side of the equation, consumers are able to really build valuable products and services without a great degree of software. So we're investing a lot in the software platform layer, more APIs and capabilities that will make it easy for companies to integrate the location technology and data into their own infrastructure.
I mean, from the consumer's perspective, location is really important to get relevance and I mean, obviously a service and personalization and all the things that everyone talks about as their strategic imperative for 2022, certainly and beyond. Location plays a key part in that, and it has to go beyond just offers for the sake of offers, which I know has been some of the early use cases for location data.
Yeah, for sure. We see that in almost everything that we do. There's use cases around better communications, even things, think about it as last mile location services, the ability to make sure that you and your Uber or Lyft driver end up at the right corner at the right time together. Restaurant services are an interesting area where making sure we get your DoorDash, delivery driver to the restaurant on time at the right place so that you get, your meal warm and the way you expect it and otherwise. There's a tremendous amount of fidelity demand, if you will, that ability to do real-time precise location to deliver on the promise of location. And that's where we're investing quite a lot as we go into the next year.
Are there sectors that aren't using your data to the full extent that they could, that you think should?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. We're starting to see what I would call broad usage across all sectors. And so some, obviously, companies that are built on location, mobility companies being a great example, have invested quite a lot over the years. I don't think it's so much about companies or sectors that aren't investing in it today. I think it's more about the ability for us to deliver value in a different way is opening up more investment. I'll give you a good example. CPG companies have often invested here and there from a location perspective, but given they don't have a direct relation to the consumer, there hasn't been a high value proposition. But as we've built in more capabilities, particularly on our platform with the Unfolded transaction we did last year, the ability to do broader geospatial analysis has actually opened up the demand curve for companies like CPG to understand, where do I need to get certain types of my consumer product goods into what stores and when, has been a huge unlock. So we're starting to see that. So I think the burden is more on us to continue to build product features and capabilities that unlock those opportunities than it's been about the sector not really seeing, if you will, the value itself in location. The concept of location is very top of mind for lots and lots of organizations. It's now our tools and software that's going to help unlock that curve.
I mean, CPGs also want to have a direct relationship with the consumer too.
Correct.
So
yes.
all of this is helping them not only keep the store shelves stocked, where they need to be stocked, but also to help develop those relationships where they see the opportunity there too.
Yeah, for sure. And we see that that's become, I think, highly topical over the last, 6 to 9 months, as everyone's learned that, global supply chains are not infallible, right? And as we've seen that just, those are the types of intense pressures that we've seen over the last 2 years. Are different in each case, but because of the pandemic, we've seen, again, a lot of digital investment and a higher than we've ever seen before understanding from almost every sector that location data is core to understanding your consumer, to understanding the best way to build your product experiences and how you engage with your customers. And so we're seeing that from kind of every corner as we go into 22.
Gary, thanks so much for your time. I look forward to chatting again soon as you develop more of these capabilities and brands and sectors take advantage of what you've developed. Thanks so much for your time.
Fantastic. Thanks, Karen. I appreciate it.